Hi everyone, today I'm going to do another video for the shelf isolation instalments. So today I'm going to actually talk about short story. In terms of coursework, I think you'd have to double check with doing things like short stories because obviously they're not as long as a novel. But the one I'm going to talk about today, even though it's a short story, I think it's quite rich in material and in terms of things you can say about it and context. Um, So it's by a woman called Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and the story is titled The Yellow Wallpaper. And this was published in the 19th century, towards the end, like 1892, around that time. And from the title, it's kind of vague, so you can't really guess what it's going to be about. But basically, just like a quick sum up in terms of plot. This lady and husband, who's a physician actually, he's called John. John rents this like summer house, so it's like a summer mansion kind of thing, quite a large house anyway. Kind of like in the countryside. And he takes his wife here for the summer, and it's basically because she's suffering from like either depression or they called it hysteria basically. So showing a lot of signs of emotion or just like instability, like being mentally unstable. Um, but what it's getting at here, it was a misconception back then that if you showed any kind of emotion, you were kind of categorised as like mentally unstable. So he basically takes his wife here for like a rest and just like a period of like calming down. And um, we actually get a quote like while because the reason why he's took her there is because of a slight hysterical tendency and a state of nervous depression. And what this revolves around, sorry, is in the 19th century it was called the rest cure. So the rest cure is basically you were confined to your bed and not allowed any strenuous activity whatsoever. So it could actually be in terms of being chained to the bed, but I don't. Yeah, we won't go into that if you're a bit. Mm. And it was like a strict diet basically, so it's kind of like milk based foods and liquids, and this had a very large impact. So kind of like patriarchal society, so like doctors, physicians, as we see as John's position in the story, it's kind of they think they know best and they think they know what's best for women. And this story kind of highlights the dangers of the rest cure. So just in terms of context, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the author, she actually suffered years of depression in real life, and she actually underwent the rest cure. And she says actually that she addresses this story to this like doctor slash physician that performed the rest cure on her, and kind of showing how damaging it is. He actually ignored it when it was published, chose not to respond. But basically, they were not allowed to do any writing, like nothing really. Like they couldn't go out. They needed to get some. Well, they needed to get some fresh air, um, but very restricted. And you'll. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but if you do decide to read the story, then you'll get this sense of how imprisoned the narrator actually is. Um, and basically, what happens is John kind of confined her to this room. It's at the top of the house, and it was actually a nursery, and it's in a very like worn condition, and there's not much in there at all. And she kind of keeps suggesting to John throughout the story that she should be allowed to do things like more outside, like we call it like the so you've got the domestic sphere, which is inside the home, and the social sphere. And the idea is that men were more involved in the social sphere, so like politics, medicine, all that kind of stuff, and women with the domestic sphere, so the family, cleaning, cooking. and she kind of suggests that she should be allowed to write, and he doesn't like this at all. And basically, the underlying issues with this and the ideas behind it is, if women were allowed to write, that would be a form of self-expression and expressing their identity, and the Rescue did not permit this at all. And what happens is, with this narrator, because she's like locked in this room, um, kind of, she just becomes, the only thing she can see is the yellow wallpaper around her. And we kind of, if you immediately think of yellow, some people kind of see this as having connotations of like sunshine and being happy, but here we kind of see it's the complete opposite. So if you think of yellow, it's quite sickly, kind of representative of disease. So that's what this is really getting at. And if you think about it, if you was, well, quite fitting actually, because we're in lockdown right now. If you think about just sitting in this room with like nothing really around you, just to look at, all she's got is this wallpaper, and she kind of, we get this through the story, that she becomes intrigued, almost obsessed with this wallpaper, looking at its shapes and how it's made, and basically the rescue, it almost accelerates this sense of insanity. So the narrator, she kind of becomes, yeah, as I said, obsessed with the wallpaper, and it comes to the point where she actually believes that there's a woman inside the wallpaper, and she's on all fours and she's trying to escape. So what she does, because there's nothing else to do, she starts tearing off strips of the wallpaper. And one day she gets the key to the room and she locks herself in, and this is kind of where the story comes to an end. Um, Not gonna go into it too much, but basically, like, she rips the wallpaper off, and she actually identifies herself as this woman that she's been seeing in the wallpaper, and she sees it as she's finally escaped, and kind of triumphing over her husband, and gets to do what she likes, basically. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much like the rundown of the plot. But I don't want to go into like what happens within that too much, um, because I don't want to like ruin it. But she's, it's almost, Charlotte Perkins Gilman said after the book, well, the story came out, that, and I quote, "It wasn't intended to drive people crazy, but to save people from being driven crazy, and it worked." So as I said, she kind of does this to like raise awareness and to highlight that this patriarchal control is wrong. And it's kind of showing attitudes towards not just, well, mental illness, and mental health, but also physical health of women. And I think it's more than, if you're interested in your coursework of like kind of feminist literature, or talking about gender roles or the role of women, I think you need to be alert that it's more than just saying, oh, women were treated badly back then, because it's more than that. Yes, that's like, yes, that's what we're saying, but it's kind of, well, why? Why were they treated like this? Is it because it was a form of self-expression, so they were like repressed in expressing themselves and their identity, and kind of why were they limited to this domestic sphere? So that's just one thing I'd be cautious with going down that route. So not just like tarring everything with the same brush, and saying that women were treated badly, they weren't allowed to do anything, because yes, that's what is at the heart of this story, but you need to think about the reasons behind that. It's actually quite sad. So when you're reading through it, on a first reading, it's not a hard read at all. Well, it can be a bit confusing. We don't actually get the name of the narrator. It's been like a year since I've read this actually, so correct me if I am wrong. Um, but almost, it's quite painful, because it gets a bit confusing when she tries to identify herself with this woman in the wallpaper, and you're almost like, who is she talking about? But that confusion is deliberate, because Perkins Gilman obviously wanted us to think that this wallpaper is kind of symbolic and representative of her struggle. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's really interesting. As I said, quite sad, but also kind of raises these issues to the surface. Um, and as I quoted before, that's what she intended to do. Um, and I think it makes it that more kind of emotional as well, because if you know the background context about Charlotte Perkins Gilman and the fact that she suffered depression and she went through these experiences of the rescue, you kind of, it seems more reliable. So even though it's a piece of fiction, from her alluding on her own experiences almost, it's like you know that these things actually went on. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Um, but yeah, you don't even have to order the story. Like, you can find it on Project Gutenberg online, and it won't take you longer to read at all, to be honest. Um, so yeah, just kind of introducing those themes of, if you're interested in madness, mental illness, like feminism, looking at the role of women and gender roles. So all those kind of things really, even like identity, as I've mentioned, and self-expression. So yeah, so thanks for watching, and I hope this has inspired you to go and read it. Thanks.